Hello, hello, hello. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Greaney. President Trump speaks to business leaders promoting his low-tax, low-regulation second-term agenda. He and Joe Biden won't face off on Thursday night. Instead, they'll have their own town hall event each. What trade stance does Joe Biden take on China? We ask the Epoch Times Washington correspondent. Several big banks report earnings today, with Goldman Sachs posting its best quarterly numbers in a decade. But Bank of America and Wells Fargo missed forecasts. Would you consider a meat pie a meal? That's the big question in the UK right now. The answer could determine whether some pubs can stay open under new lockdown rules. President Trump spoke to Wall Street and business leaders today, just 20 days before the election. Trump being Trump, he told them America will see an economic catastrophe if Joe Biden gets elected.
President Trump frames the election as a choice between, quote, a socialist nightmare and the American dream.
It's the choice between historic prosperity under my pro-American policies or very crippling poverty and a steep depression under the radical left. And that's what you'll have, is a depression.
Speaking from the Rose Garden, his virtual remarks to the Economic Club of New York were similar to his usual campaign speeches. He says he is pro-low tax, low regulation, and promises to deliver tax cuts for middle-income earners.
I will implement a middle-class tax cut, reduce regulations that stifle small businesses, and we've already cut regulations more than any president in history. And by the way, I believe strongly in regulation, but not where it takes 21 years to get a highway approved. I believe in regulation where it takes 1 year or 2 years.
He also criticized Democrats for wanting to impose stricter housing rules.
This plan will devastate the property values of millions of middle-class homeowners, including the majority of African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American households who live in the suburbs.
The Biden campaign promises to promote fairer housing and eliminate local and state housing rules that protect discrimination. According to the Biden campaign website, he will implement an Obama-era rule called AFFH. It requires communities getting federal money to actively eliminate discrimination. The Trump administration abolished the rule in 2018. It said it gave the federal government too much power to decide where and how every new home, church, and business in America should be built.
Biden, of course, has always denied being a socialist. And the two were set to debate tonight, but because of disagreement over the president's health, they'll just do separate town halls instead. Not quite as interesting for us at home. Trump will be in Miami for an event hosted by his friends at NBC. The president has always been critical of their coverage of him. And Biden will be in Philadelphia with ABC. Both events start at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Biden has recently changed his stance on China trade. In the past, he criticized Trump's tariffs and denied China were a threat to the United States. He now says he'll keep putting pressure on China and keep the tariffs in place. But Americans in general are becoming increasingly unhappy with the Chinese Communist Party. So how do we know Biden isn't just going along with the trend and will reverse course if he's elected? Asked the Epoch Times Washington correspondent Mela Khan.
Yes, there are some skepticisms as well, you just mentioned, because of Biden's previous position with respect to China. But I think with respect to tariffs, I spoke with experts, and their expectation is that tariffs will remain, at least in the short term, because removing tariffs without getting anything in exchange from China will look very weak. Will reduce U.S. competitive position when dealing with substantial issues like structural reforms, like subsidies, IP theft. So at least in the short term, Biden won't change tariffs, they claim.
And what about the president's phase one trade deal? A lot of criticism of it. A lot of people say it hasn't worked out. Will Biden continue with it, or what do you think he'll do?
I think phase one trade deal had some disappointment initially because of China's inability to meet the commitments in the first few months of the COVID pandemic. But recently, we are hearing a lot of purchases from China. They have made a lot of a record volumes of purchases of farm products. So I think at this stage, getting rid of the phase one deal, it doesn't look reasonable for Trump. But he also said in the past that if China doesn't meet the commitments, he would basically walk away from the deal. And I think Biden's position will be the same. One trade expert told me something interesting, that Biden will not use the terms phase one, phase two, because he doesn't want Trump's approach to this deal. So he would basically change the name and maybe use his own approach in dealing with China trade.
But do you think much of the same? I'm sure the Chinese mightn't be so happy to hear that. We'll wait and see. Mel, appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And an update on the stimulus talks, with the Treasury Secretary saying he and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are still far apart on some issues. It'll be hard to reach a deal before the election. Here he is at the Milken Institute Global Conference in Washington earlier today.
I'd say at this point, getting something done before the election and executing on that would be difficult, just given where we are in the level of details. But we're going to try to continue to work through these issues.
Mnuchin said he doesn't agree with what he calls Pelosi's all-or-nothing approach. He said there's still about $300 billion unspent from previous coronavirus aid packages that could be repurposed by Congress immediately. One of Pelosi's aides said the Speaker and Mnuchin spoke today and it was, quote, quite productive. But he said the Trump administration doesn't have a national strategic testing plan, and it's a major area of disagreement. He did say the two sides will speak again on Thursday. And timely news. And the head of the IMF warns that countries shouldn't cut stimulus spending too early. She says it could have enormous economic consequences for the global economy.
IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says it's crucial for all countries to continue with relief measures. She said, pull the plug too early and you risk serious self-inflicted harm. Last week, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell made a similar statement. He said the risk of overdoing stimulus measures is smaller than not doing enough. On Tuesday, the IMF released its latest forecast for economic growth in 2020. It projects the global economy will shrink by 4.4% this year. That would make it the worst annual plunge since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The IMF's revised outlook upgraded the forecast for U.S. economic output. It says the U.S. economy is recovering faster than expected. Back in June, the IMF predicted the U.S. economy would drop 8% in 2020, but now it projects only a 4.3% drop for the full year.
And Wall Street finished weaker again today, weighed down by Amazon and Microsoft. The Dow fell nearly 166 points, or 0.58%. The S&P 500 lost over 23 points, or 0.66%. The Nasdaq dropped more than 95 points, or 0.8%. Bank of America and Wells Fargo both tumbled today after disappointing quarterly results. United Health reported better than expected earnings, but the stock still fell about 3%. And as I mentioned, three of America's biggest banks posted their earnings today, with Goldman Sachs posting its best quarterly performance in a decade. Welcome to the topsy-turvy world of 2020.
A trio of earnings released Wednesday from three of America's biggest banks, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, laid to bear the contrast between those banks able to benefit from a surge in Wall Street activity and others unable to escape the impact of the deepest economic downturn in decades. Goldman Sachs posted its best quarterly numbers in a decade. The Wall Street trading powerhouse smashed earnings expectations as trading action rebounded sharply in the past 3 months. Goldman also got a boost from handsome fees tied to a number of high-profile initial public offerings it brought to market. Total revenues surged 30% last quarter. One other thing that helped, it only had to lay aside $278 million to cover potential loans that could go bad. Things did not go as well at Bank of America. The second largest U.S. bank missed revenue forecasts. Unlike the other banks that have reported, its trading results were weak And to compound its woes, Bank of America wasn't able to make up the difference due to its large loan portfolio, which is getting squeezed by record low interest rates. Fearing future losses in its commercial lending business, the bank set aside $1.4 billion. That was nothing compared to Wells Fargo. The major lender set aside $20.5 billion for loans to consumers and businesses that might not get repaid. Wells Fargo doesn't have major trading operations like many other banks to fall back on, and it is still paying the financial costs for a 2016 account scandal where employees opened millions of bogus accounts for customers. It paid out nearly $1 billion in remediation fees last quarter. Profits at the nation's fourth largest bank missed forecasts.
And the UK is now under new virus restrictions. Pubs in high-risk areas have to close unless they serve what's called a substantial meal. Now people in the UK are asking, what exactly does that mean?
New lockdown measures came into effect this Wednesday in the UK. There are now 3 tiers of lockdowns depending on local infection rates. In the highest tier, pubs can only stay open if they serve a substantial meal. But what's a substantial meal? A packet of potato chips? No. Is a meat pie considered a substantial meal? No. But if it's served with fries or salad, maybe.
Pubs and bars must close unless they can operate solely as a restaurant serving alcohol only as part of a main meal.
The rules may confuse customers wondering which pubs will stay open. And one hospitality association says it's incredibly confusing for businesses that aren't sure which category they fall into. For pubs that are forced to shut because of lockdown, the government will grant 67% of employees' wages. But if they voluntarily close, they won't get any government financial support. So instead of closing, some pubs might start serving substantial meals to stay open.
And staying in the UK, the Brexit deadline is just about up. But it looks like the European Union and Britain will have to extend it to prolong talks again. They're aiming to get a deal by the end of this year.
Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier has been briefing EU leaders ahead of a summit in Brussels from Thursday. With €1 trillion of trade at stake, they're likely to press him to intensify talks. But a draft summit decision seen by Reuters says progress is still not sufficient. This week, leaders including Germany's Angela Merkel have said they still want a deal, though.
The EU is united in its desire to still achieve this in such a short space of time, but we must also be prepared in the event that no agreement is reached.
The EU wants agreement by this month in order to leave time for ratification by the European Parliament. 3 sticking points remain: state aid for firms, procedures for settling disputes, and fishing rights. The latter appears particularly intractable, with little sign a deal is close. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney says Brussels won't betray the fishing industry.
EU fishermen are not going to be sold out in an effort to get an agreement on a future relationship with the UK on trade.
Eyes too on the UK Parliament. A bill going through there could give London the right to breach existing withdrawal agreements, a move Brussels says is against international law, though UK Foreign Minister Dominic Raab says that shouldn't scupper a deal.
I'm hopeful that we can close the gap, but ultimately it will require the same goodwill, the same pragmatism, the same flexibility on the EU side that the United Kingdom and this Prime Minister have shown.
However, this week's summit is expected to conclude with a warning to the UK. Implement existing agreements in full before you think about getting any kind of new deal.
Maybe they'll never leave. It's still to come this evening. Supermarkets sue New York. They're calling out irrational government overreach. And the United States might restrict a digital payment company based in China. They say it's to prevent the Chinese regime from accessing American users' financial data. That and more after the break. Welcome back. New York supermarkets want to throw new plastic bag regulations in the trash, or at least they want the state to keep their word on the details. Just 10 days before a ban on all single-use plastic bags, the rules were changed. Avi Kaner, co-owner of the Morton Williams chain, had just ordered over 1 million replacements at 20 cents each. Not a small amount. Then he was told they're all illegal. They're illegal because the handles of the bags aren't sewn on. Because the handles are part of the bag and aren't sewn on, they can't be used. I asked Kaner, what's the rationale?
There is no rationale. This is complete government overreach. The rationale is that these reusable bags that could be reused 125 times and they're as sturdy as can be, right? They say it looks too much like, a single-use bag because the shape of it is the same. And the reason these single-use bags are so sturdy is because the handles are built into the bags. So it makes there's zero rationale for the state to suddenly say that you cannot use reusable bags if the handles are connected. Once again, these bags cost 20 cents each, whereas these bags cost 99 cents each. Why does New York State want to make New Yorkers suffer even more than they've already suffered? It makes absolutely no sense.
But despite being landed with over 1 million unusable bags, Kaner told us he's most upset that customers will need to pay 5 times more for that cloth bag with the sewn-on handles. He calls it irrational government overreach. We asked New York State, but they couldn't tell us why bags with sewn-on handles work better. All they could do was send us their definition of a reusable bag. Ironically, the ban on single-use bags will need to be postponed again till a new legal challenge is settled. I'll never look at a bag the same way again. And staying in New York, community activists are demanding the city end its tax lien sales. They say it sells property owners' debt to multinational banks. This outsourcing, they claim, puts debtors in a predatory Wall Street collection system. Our reporter Kevin Hogan brings us more on the change the activists are seeking.
Community and housing associations are teaming up with lawmakers in efforts to abolish the tax lien sale in New York City. What is a tax lien sale? Take a property owner, for example. If he has unpaid water bills or didn't pay his taxes, those unpaid charges become tax liens, aka claims against the property. The city sells those liens to a private trust managed by Bank of New York Mellon. The bank adds on fees and interest to unpaid debts the owner owes and can eventually foreclose on the property to get the money.
They then hire what I call bill collectors or legalized loan sharks to then charge 9 to 18% compounded monthly. Again, kicking someone where they're down during a pandemic. We had no choice but to lift up our voice and address this unjust situation.
According to the lawyer working with the activists, the city sells the debt for 70 cents on the dollar. The city didn't respond to us right away, but in 2017 it told the Gothamist the sale is critical in ensuring collection of property taxes and in turn funding important services in the city budget. But some argue it is negatively affecting minority communities.
The lien sale has a destabilizing effect on communities of color. A disproportionate number of the homes on the lien sale are individuals of color. And this will transfer wealth. What we are seeing in communities of color is the greatest transfer of wealth in recent memory.
The homeowners associations are saying when a property owner falls behind in their bills, the first thing the city should do is bring aid to them. So instead of outsourcing their debt, the city should connect them with a nonprofit or a city agency that can help them. That way, families can stay in the community instead of being foreclosed on.
Especially in the middle of a pandemic, how knowing that people have lost their jobs, knowing that many people have been sick, knowing that many people unfortunately have passed away, how on earth are we still following through with tax lien sales?
The president of the Cypress Hills Civic Association said if someone is behind on their bills or taxes by only a few $1,000s, they are subject to the lien sale. The tax lien sale is a Giuliani-era policy that is set to expire at the end of the year. The activists are pleading to the city not to reauthorize it. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
And Washington is reportedly considering restrictions for a Chinese payment giant. It wants to prevent American users' financial data from falling into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, as if the company expands in the United States. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
The Trump administration is reportedly weighing restrictions on a Chinese payment giant. Details are still limited, but the concern is, as the Chinese payment giant grows and eats into the U.S. market, American users' financial data could be accessed by the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese digital payment giant Ant Group has close ties with the communist regime. It also dominates China's mobile payment industry. The company owns one of China's most popular payment apps, Alipay. It's used by 900 million Chinese people. That's almost 70% of China's population. Ant Group has limited presence in the United States. Some say it'll surge in a new market. The mobile payment industry is still developing in the U.S., but Ant Group is a player with decades of experience. It's already started making moves. Last year, one of the largest pharmacy chains in the U.S., Walgreens, started accepting Alipay. And in 2018, Ant Group tried to acquire a U.S. digital payment company, MoneyGram. The deal would allow the Chinese company to access all of MoneyGram's user data, including information that belongs to military members. But Washington killed the merger, citing national security concerns. The problem with Ant Group is similar to that of TikTok. They're both owned by Chinese companies. And Chinese law requires companies to hand over user data if the regime requests it. Ant Group founder Jack Ma previously pledged loyalty to the communist regime. In 2017, he said, "As long as the country needs it, the company is ready to dedicate Alipay to the country at any time." Ant Group also has a problematic past. In 2018, China's internet regulators criticized the company for violating user privacy. They said Ant Group's Alipay app enrolled its users into a credit score system without telling them, and that the move would give the company access to users' financial data and the right to share it with third parties. Ant Group uses facial recognition in its payment systems. It also helped China build its social credit system, which tracks citizens' movements and rates them based on their behavior. The company is now preparing for what could be the largest initial public offering, or IPO, in history. IPO is a way for companies to raise funds by selling stock to the public, and Ant Group is looking to rake in $35 billion. Juliet Song, NTD News.
And still to come this evening. With no stimulus deal in sight, is there anything struggling Americans can do? We talked to a personal finance expert who says you can fund your own stimulus. And Americans receiving Social Security will see a larger check starting next year, but it's just a small increase. Find out how much after the break. Welcome back. Stimulus talks are at a standstill, but do not fear. We spoke to a personal finance expert who says, why not fund your own stimulus check?
The White House and congressional negotiators can't agree on the next stimulus package, but many Americans are hurting as they wait. The last stimulus check of $1,200 was sent out in the spring.
They're all suffering.
There's people out there with their families still don't have a job. People lost their job.
Yeah, I'm saving right now. I think it would be nice to get something.
President Trump offered a $1.8 trillion stimulus bill last week, but was rejected by the Democrats.
Anyone who has a heart or compassion, I mean, really, what's holding back?
We spoke to personal finance company Bankrate. It recommends that people save up and fund their own stimulus check.
What if they had $1,200 set up so they had their own stimulus
check for the future.
Goldberg says by saving a little each day, a person can save $1,200 in a year.
A few dollars a day times 365, that'll get you to that $1,200.
He says the saving mindset is important. Adding to your emergency fund will always be good. Last week, President Trump said he would call off stimulus talks, but yesterday he called on lawmakers to, quote, go big or go home. It's not clear when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the White House will speak again on the stimulus deal.
Goldberg says the next step is to save 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. That's the usual recommended amount for an emergency fund. Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
And Americans who receive Social Security will see a small bump in their monthly checks starting in January. The Social Security Administration says the payments will go up by 1.3% to account for the rise of the cost of living. It means the average monthly check will increase by $20 to $1,543. Those who receive Social Security disability benefits will see an extra $16 a month. The agency also announced new taxable income thresholds. It means American workers will owe 6.2% Social Security payroll tax. Starting next year, about the first $142,000 of American wages will be subject to the tax, but 70 million Americans receive Social Security benefits. And that is the latest business updates for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.